Former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke was here in the briefing room to talk about immigration policy and a number of other issues out on the campaign. Congressman, great to see you. Thanks for coming in. Yeah. So the administration today announced plans to move forward with this proposal to collect DNA samples from migrants coming across the border. Is that worth it if it prevents or stops even one crime? They say this is a crime prevention tool.
This is part of the fear that the president is trying to stoke about immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees. We know that they commit crimes in this country at a far lower rate than those who are born in this country. We know that they arrive at our border as vulnerable, as defenseless, as desperate as a human being can be. And not only is he proposing taking DNA from these asylum seekers, he's already placed them in cages, separated them from their families, lost the lives of 7 children over the course of the last year. And that's happening in the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet, one that is comprised of immigrants and asylum seekers and their sons and daughters. So this is absolutely the wrong policy. And to answer your question, no, it does not improve the security or safety of our communities or our country.
And there does seem to be some evidence that these policies, as extreme as they may be, seem to be having some deterrent effect. I mean, the numbers have been coming down at the border. Do you attribute some of that decline in the migrant crisis to what they have been doing?
You're asking, is it owing to the cruelty and the torture committed by this president against defenseless children, or this Orwellian-named migrant protection protocol, where you have tens of thousands of asylum seekers waiting in Ciudad Juarez or Tijuana or Matamoros, not able to process their asylum claims here? That may have some effect, but is that the price that we're willing to pay? Is that something that we want to have on our conscience, a stain on our memory? I think we need to follow our own asylum laws and recognize that part of the greatness of this country is owed to those who chose us and came here when they had no other place to go to. As president, I will never separate a family or incarcerate a child or treat them with the inhumanity that they have been that they've received from this president under this administration. I want to rewrite our immigration laws so that they fully reflect the reality on the ground. The fact that these asylum seekers are not a threat.
Would you decriminalize the border crossings?
I would never criminally prosecute anyone seeking asylum or refuge. I'd never incarcerate another family. In fact, I'd end for-profit migrant detention centers anywhere in this country going forward. This is perhaps the greatest promise that we have as a country. Those who choose to come here and by their very presence make us stronger, more successful. And I tell you this from the perspective of El Paso, one of the safest communities in the United States of America. By their very presence, they make us safer and more secure than we would have been otherwise.
I'm going to ask you about a big controversy today in Washington. I know you've seen it because you've weighed in on it on Twitter. A lot of Democrats have been condemning President Trump's use of the word lynching in comparison to impeachment. You've been traveling the country, you've been talking to a lot of people. Do you think we've all become sort of desensitized to these sort of outrageous statements by him? Do you find that voters are just sort of, it's baked into the cake with Donald Trump? I mean, this is just yet another in a long litany of things that have people fired up.
He certainly wants to normalize this bizarre behavior, these kinds of injustices, the lies that he's been telling. But it's interesting, earlier I was in Alabama, in Montgomery, in the Legacy Museum and the Memorial to Peace and Justice. And there you see the names of the African Americans who were lynched in this country from 1877 to 1950. Absolutely. Every single county, and not just in the Deep South, although that's the preponderance of the victims, but throughout this country. For the president to invoke that word to describe what he's experiencing as the most powerful man on the face of the planet today, a white man who's enjoyed privilege and power unknown to so many millions more in this country, is one of the most obscene things that I've heard him say in an administration that is rife with obscenity. So
you say he's a white supremacist.
He is, absolutely. And not only has he brought forward and into the open a racism, an intolerance, and a hatred that has long defined the American experience for too many, but he's also directed that and its violence towards populations that don't look like or love like or pray like the majority. We saw that brought home to us in El Paso, Texas on August 3rd when a gunman armed with an AK-47 opened fire in a Walmart, repeating the same words the president had used, warning of an invasion, of an infestation, of being replaced by Hispanics as a member of the white majority. So this president poses a mortal danger to our fellow Americans.
And yet so many in your state support him, if not for those reasons and the language that he uses, for a host of other reasons. But do you find those people, particularly people in the middle, the kind of the Obama swing voters, people who voted for Obama, voted for Donald Trump, are they also racist? Do you see a strain in those people of white supremacy? How do you explain that juxtaposition?
If you're talking about Texas, the support he may have enjoyed in 2016 has largely evaporated. In a head-to-head contest with Donald Trump, the polling indicates that we would come out on top. And this is a state that last elected or selected a Democrat for president in 1976 with Jimmy Carter. So the trends that we see in Texas, where last year we only lost by 2.6% to Ted Cruz, won more votes than any Democrat had before, won independents for the first time in decades, and nearly 500,000 Republicans. That's the way that we defeat Donald Trump in November of 2020. And Texas, with 38 electoral college votes, could make that victory decisive so that there's no open question that the president can exploit to try to build upon the division that he's created in this country.
So you think you're the most electable Democratic candidate in this race?
I do, and Texas makes that case more clearly than anything else that I could say. Those 38 electoral votes not only put Donald Trump away forever, but they also forever change the electoral landscape in the United States of America. They allow us to build the majorities we need to confront climate change, to rewrite our laws when it comes to immigration or health care, or including more people in the economy. A very ambitious agenda before us. The ability to defeat Donald Trump and then bring this divided country together again is important if we're going to be able to overcome any or all of these challenges.
And how do you convince more Americans, like the Texans that believe in you, that you are electable in a red state? How do you make that case? I mean, we're in crunch time now. You've seen the numbers with Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden. You've been hanging out in the single digits. You're struggling to get into the November debate. But here we are. How do you kick it into gear? What is the case you need to be making?
Yeah, almost always in presidential cycles at this time in the election, the front runner loses their perch. Those in single digits ultimately rise up. That's almost always been the case, at least in the Democratic primary. So I take some comfort in my reading of history, some comfort in the fact that almost 90% of our fellow Americans, those who will be voting in the Democratic primaries, have yet to make up their mind.
Do you have to win Iowa?
We have to do very well in Iowa. And in fact, after this interview, I'm headed to Iowa to be with those who will decide the first caucus in the nation, and to make sure that I have a chance to answer their questions and be with them in their communities.
100 days away. Finally, I want to ask you about Facebook, because they announced this week that Russia is already laying the groundwork to meddle again in the 2020 election, and the company announced some steps they're taking. Do you think Facebook is doing enough to prevent a repeat of 2016? No. And we're not doing enough as a country to hold them accountable. Right now, legally, we treat Facebook and other social media platforms akin to a utility, as though they have no control over the content that passes through their pipes, when in reality, they're more like a publisher. They curate the content that we see. You and I, the people on Facebook, have become the products on Facebook. And so they must be regulated as a publisher would be regulated, held accountable for the content that is published. And the fact that they've allowed Donald Trump to purchase advertising that lies about Joe Biden, a prospective Democratic challenger, shows that Facebook right now is not obeying the rules of the road that we need to protect our democracy and ensure that we have free and fair elections in 2020. Mark Zuckerberg is going to face a lot of questions tomorrow on Capitol Hill. He'll be here, and you'll be in Iowa. Congressman, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks
Appreciate
for coming
it.
in.